Let's learn how we can create text bubble animations using friction. We'll start with this simple one here, and then we'll move on to this one. I'll first break down how this was made, and then we can do it from scratch. So if I play back here, we have our text animation. So let me zoom in here because this is a vertical 1080p by 1920. We'll be looking at null objects inside of friction, as well as parenting. If I move further down in the animation here, this null is controlling our block of text. All right, so let's start from scratch. I'll go up to the menu bar inside of scene and I'll create a new scene. This will be scene 1. I think I'm going to keep the 1080p by 1920 composition, and I'll reduce the amount of frames to 150 and press OK. Now there is one thing I want from the other scene, and that is a reference screenshot that I used as a reference. So down in the timeline at the top here, I'll click on split horizontally. This will split the timeline into 2 timelines. I'll switch the second one here to scene 0, where I have the reference. I'll left click, hold, and drag it onto the new scene, and I'll simply close out this timeline. So now I have the text bubble reference. I'll unlock it and reposition it. Let's zoom out here, see what we're working with. I'll move it down, let's say around here. Now the composition itself really depends on you, but this is what I'll be working with. So I'll lock it again, and now let's start. The first thing I'll do is grab the rectangle tool, and then I'll make a selection around this second bubble here. So I'll left click, hold, and drag. Then over in the properties panel, I'll expand the rectangle, and I'm looking for round radius. I'll hold down shift, click on one value, hold and drag. And by holding down shift, it's going to affect both values. So both the X and Y. Next thing I'll do is change the color of our rectangle. So I'll go to the fill and stroke, click on the color picker, and I'll pick a color. Now I'll collapse it and switch over to our text tool. I'll click over the bubble. This will create a text object, and inside of the properties panel, at the bottom here, we have the area where we can enter our text. Now to not have to rewrite everything, I saved it in a notepad, so I'll simply copy, move back to friction, paste it in here, and there we have it. I'll switch the color of the text to white. I'll switch the font to Noto Sans. Where is it? It is right here, Noto Sans. And I'll drop the size to something like, let's see, 32. I'll hide the rectangle so I can compare this to the reference. 32 might be a bit much. Let's try 28. Grab the selection tool and I'll move the text. I'll go back to the notepad and copy the right block of text. Come back here, Control A, Control V. I'd say that 28 is good enough. I'll bring back the rectangle block of text. And now to add our breaking points. So over here, I guess I'll put it after Jello. So still Jello from the block. There we have it. The next thing I'll do is simply holding down shift, I'll click on the text and click on the rectangle, and I'll press Control G to group them. And I'll rename this. So rename to Bubble 1, or yes, Bubble 1, space 1. Press Enter to confirm. Now I'll duplicate the Bubble 1. I'll press G and Y to move it up. I'll try to align the bottom here with this one, just to stay in the same spirit of the spacing. We could change the color to tell them apart, or I can simply lower the opacity of the reference, which will automatically change the color based on the blending with the background. Okay, so I'll zoom back out, and now I'll go back to the notepad. I'll grab the text, and then inside of bubble, I'll click on the text here, so I can Control A, Control V, paste our text, and I'll grab the text from in here, press G to grab, and I'll move it, let's say down here. I think I'll do the same thing for this block of text. Grab it and let's grab it from inside the bubble. Press G, grab, and simply move it to the side. I won't be recreating the check marks or the time, but you can for more realism. Now, I'll go back to the top rectangle here. And there are 2 ways to scale down your rectangle. First option is to grab the point mode and you have these two dots, so this pink dot up here and this pink dot at the bottom right, and you simply have to left click on it and drag. And this is one way to rescale. Or grab the selection tool. You can double click to go inside of the group, that way you can grab your objects directly from the canvas area or the viewer. And I'll place this there. I'll double click outside to exit the group. Another way to resize your rectangles is if you expand it here, you have the top left and bottom right. This is referencing the same dots that we just saw. So on the top left here, we have X and Y, and I want to push the X back a bit. Let's say around here. Okay, right, so now I'll grab bubble 1, I'll press Ctrl D to duplicate, and I'll move bubble 2 at the bottom here. I'll press G then Y and I'll move it down. I'll place it, let's say around this height. I'll check the distance in just a bit. I'll go back to my notepad, I'll grab the block of text, Ctrl C, come back to bubble number 2, click on the text, Ctrl A, Ctrl V. And now to create the breakage, so after the word text, I'll simply add a break. Then I guess after the word the might work best. And finally after that. Not fully convinced here. I think I might break it after the. I'll leave it like that for now. Then I'll grab the rectangle. I'll expand it, and I'll use the bottom right corner, and I only want to move it on the y-axis, which is the second value. So I'll drag it down. There we have it. I can grab the selection tool, grab our text, and move it up a little bit. Okay, collapse everything. Now I can check the distance between them. I'll disable the reference and look at the distance between those. I think it's good enough. Finally, I'll grab bubble 0, so the top one over here. I'll press Ctrl D to duplicate again. This is text bubble number 3. Let's pan down a little bit. And with the bubble 3 selected, I'm going to press G, Y, move it down. I'll give it a bit of a wider gap. Then I'll press GX, move it to the other side. And inside of it here, I'll grab the text and I'll try to move it more to the left, as such. Finally, I'll change the color of the rectangle itself. So I'll go for something dark, maybe based off of a desaturated yellow, like this. Finally, just to see our bottom bubble, I'll simply grab the rectangle tool, I'll make a general selection over everything, and you can press the End key on your keyboard, or simply drag this down all the way. Then I'll lock it, and simply rename it to background. Change the color, right, because it's locked, we can't select it, there we go. Change the color of it. I'll make sure to grab the rectangle inside of there, change the color. All right, so now let's start animating. To animate them, I'll start with a simple upwards motion. So I'm going to expand all of them. Okay, then I'll expand the transform inside of them and the translation. Now, we only really need them to move on the y-axis, so I'm only going to create a keyframe on the y-axis. Before I do so, I'm going to move to frame 10, let's say, and then I'll create that keyframe. So click on Y, the little white dot next to Y for all 4 of them. Now, this will be, let's say, 10 frames of motion, so I'll move it to frame 20, and I'll select all of them on the viewer, so the canvas area. I'll press G then Y, which should add a keyframe automatically, and I'll press escape so that the movement is not registered, but the keyframes are created. I'll move back to the first keyframe. I'll press G, Y, and I'll move it down a bit. Say like this. So now we have this little upwards motion. They all have it. And now I'll go back to the second keyframe here, and I'll keyframe the opacity for all of them. So opacity. So this is the ending opacity, full opacity 100. I'll go back to the first keyframe and I'll drop the opacity to 0 for all of them. All right, but when I play back, you'll notice that despite the opacity being at 0, nothing changes. This is because we are changing the opacity of the group itself and not the objects inside of it. In order for the opacity to be registered, you first have to rasterize the group into a layer. You can do so by clicking on this checkboard here, or simply right-click on a layer, go to Action, and go to Promote the Layer. And it will automatically promote it to a layer. Since we had all of them selected, it did it for all of them. And now when we play back, we have the fade in. Another thing you might notice is now our text seems a bit pixelated. If I grab the point selection and I click on it, the text is clear. If I click away, double click, it becomes pixelated again. These are still vectors, but because we rasterize the groups into layers, they do seem pixelated. You can fix this by going to the status bar and going from 50 to 100. You can also manually input values in here, so values as high as 400, I believe, but I'll stick to 100 for this one. All right, so we have our initial animation. I'll fit the entire timeline in here, and here is our initial animation. Now all that's left to do is to simply left click, hold, drag over the keyframes and move them apart. So let's say they take a bit longer to write the big block of text and the other person takes longer to respond. I almost forgot, I have to change the response for the last text. So in here, let's go for text. I'll grab the how did you get this number and paste it in here. There we go. Now on frame 0, I'll press I and I'll move the playhead a little further and I'll press O. I'll press Shift Spacebar and this will play from the beginning. Friction caches it first and then plays back. I might have moved the text bubbles a little too low on the y-axis earlier because it feels a little spaced out, but that's not really an issue. The next thing to do is to have them scroll down or basically scroll up as the text bubbles come in. Since we don't have guides or grids just yet inside of Friction, I'm going to create a path as a guide. So I'll zoom in here, I'll left click right there, and I'll left click right here. So this will be my indicator. For good measure, I'm going to zoom out, left click with the point selector, left click on one node, press X, and I'll drag it all the way to the other side. All right. Now I'll go on this keyframe when the second bubble is supposed to start appearing. And instead of moving each one of these individually, I'm going to press Shift, grab all of them, and then press G to group all of them together. I'll rename the group to Bubbles Comp. Now we're going to create a null. So I'll go over to the toolbox, I'll grab the null, it's between the color picker and the text. So I'll grab the null and I'll add it around here. I'll expand the null, increase the size of it, and I'll change the color to something a bit more vivid. All right. Now you can either parent the bubble comp to the null and animate the null, or you can parent the bubble comp to the null and then animate the bubbles comp transform. Whichever one you choose, you'll be able to move the bubbles using either the bubbles comp or the null object, depending on which order you choose. But regardless, we are going to parent the bubbles comp to the null. So expand transform, go down to transform effects, right click and add parent effect. Then let's expand this, expand the parent, go to target and switch it to null object. I'll actually rename the null, so rename, and I'll change it to bubbles control. This also updates inside of the target. So now with the selection tool, when I grab the null and move it around, it's going to move all of them. So you can either animate the null or animate the bubbles and control them with the null. For this particular case, I'm going to animate the null itself. So I'll expand the bubbles comp so I can see the keyframes. I'll go to the third keyframe, so when the second bubble is going to show up. With the null selected, I'm going to expand its transform. I'm going to expand the translation. I'll add a keyframe on the Y. I'll move to when the bubble is done showing up. And I'll press G then Y and move it up. I'll use the path as a guide. I'll repeat this process. I'll move to the next keyframe. I'll press G, Y just to add a keyframe, then I'll press escape. And then I'll move to the second keyframe when the bubble appears, press G, Y, and I'll move it up. Okay, let's repeat this one last time for the last bubble. I'll press G, Y. You can add keyframes by pressing Insert on your keyboard, but I don't have Insert on this keyboard, so I'm using this method instead. Another option would be to right-click on the value and simply add key. All right, so I'll move to the last keyframe here, G, Y, and I'll push this up, let's say around here. So now if we were to play back, let's hide the path first. So this reference, I'll save and shift spacebar. All right, we have our animation. Now, if you want to change the interpolation, so make it smoother, have a bit of ease in, ease out, you can either do it manually by opening the values, going all the way to Y and then switching to the graph and doing it manually for each one of them. Or alternatively, I'll switch back to the keyframes. Let's expand this a bit. You can grab all of these keyframes, not the ones for the null, not yet. And you should have a button down at the bottom right of the timeline that allows you to add ease in, ease out, or ease in, ease out. Choose your interpolation, I'll choose cubic, and it's going to add additional keyframes in between our keyframes. This is because Friction's animation, or at least the automatic interpolation, is designed for SVG web animation. In SVG web animation, I was informed that it doesn't recognize curves, so it needs actual keyframes, so periodic mathematical values for it to follow to create or to emulate ease in or ease out. But it essentially does the same thing. It adds a bit of ease in and ease out to your animation, simply adds more keyframes. So you can choose whichever approach works best for you, having additional keyframes or manually adjusting the graph. Now, when it comes to the nulls control, because it's all the same values on the same object, if we were to use this automatic ease in, ease out, it's going to turn it all into a single line of action. So Control Z out of this. So to add the easing, you would have to choose 2 points at a time and then add your ease. So I'll add ease in cubic, do the same thing with this one, ease in cubic and ease in cubic. But that's pretty much it for this first example. Let's move on to the second bubble animation. The second bubble animation was actually inspired by this video here on YouTube, and it is an After Effects tutorial. I thought that it looked cool, and I was curious to see how to recreate it inside of Friction. So I'll take a similar approach to what we just did. I'm going to break it down a little bit, and then we'll go ahead and do it from scratch. So the first thing I'll do is go on frame 0. I'll disable the other bubbles, so bubble 2 and 1. I'll go inside of bubble 0. I'll go inside of transform effect, parent, and I'm going to switch it from cam 1 to none. This way it doesn't follow the null. The null was serving as a sort of fake camera to move it around. I'll also switch the resolution to 100. Alright, let's break down the rectangle first, I suppose. Inside of the rectangle, I'll disable the text for now. Let's zoom in a bit. Inside of the rectangle, I'm using 2 raster effects. A rim light, which I think I generated myself, so you might not find it inside of the currently available Friction shaders. Once I feel that these have been refined enough, I will make them public, but in the meantime, I won't be putting any links for them because I'm still trying to refine them. So I'm going to disable the rim light. Not to worry, I will show you how you can generate the rim light inside of Friction without any shaders. And next we have a drop shadow, so the shadow. The shadow is available inside of Friction by default. Alright, I'll disable the drop shadow as well. Now, when it comes to the colors of the rectangle here, if I were to select it inside of the fill, you can see that it's using a gradient and it's a linear gradient. You can choose between linear or radial with the gradients. To create a gradient color, you simply click on this plus over here. So I'll grab the rectangle tool and I'll create a new rectangle right next to this one. So let's say like this. Then I'll expand it. I'll go to the round radius, which should also be in the toolbar, but I'll just do it from here. I'll hold down Shift, left click, hold, and I'll drag it until it's well rounded. I'll grab the selection tool again, and over in the fill, I'll switch to gradient. Then I'll press the little plus here. I'll scroll down to see the new gradient and left click on it. Now, to change the colors of your gradient, you simply have to click on either one of these 2 colors. You can add new stops by clicking on the plus here. It's going to add them. You can left click and drag them around to change their position. And you can left click on them and press the minus to delete the colors. Let's see if this updates. All right. Now I'll grab the first color, I'll grab the color picker, and I'll click over here. I'll grab the second color and I'll change it up a little bit. I'll make it more of a blue. And this one, I'll add a bit to the saturation, maybe even make it a little darker. Now to control the gradient itself, we can grab the point control, and I'm going to zoom in here so you can see that the gradient controller is very close to the controller of the rectangle. This usually won't happen with other shapes, but with the rectangle, it does. So they're very close to each other. So you first want to zoom in and move that point away. And there we have it. Okay. So here you can use these points to move the gradient and change the position, rotation, etc. All right. So already we have our rectangle with the color, and that's that. The next thing I'll do is add the rim light. So to add the rim light, I'm going to grab the rectangle and I'll press Ctrl G. This will create a group with it. I'll rename this to Bubble Comp. Press OK. Inside of Bubble Comp, we have our rectangle. I'll double click on the Bubble Comp to make sure that I go inside of the group. Otherwise, I would be outside of the group. So now I can select rectangle inside here. Next, I'll grab the path tool and I'll create a path like a rim light selection around the rectangle. So I'll left click here, hold, I'll drag. I'll left click up here, hold and drag a bit. Then I'll make the selection go all around. Left click here, I guess drag a bit. I'll drag a bit like this. Then I'll left click in here, hold, drag, and left click on the final dot, hold, and I'll drag out. I'll grab the point editor again. Let's zoom in a bit. You can change the nodes, the node types up here. So you can make it smooth, corner node, symmetrical, etc. I'll make these smooth and I'll adjust them to try and get a very rim selection. So let's move these around, drag this one out, drag this point. I think these are symmetrical. Let's just make it smooth. This one, smooth. And I'll do the same for this one, just make it smooth. So when I modify one handle, it doesn't affect the other one. All right. Now I'll give it a flat fill and I'll remove the stroke. For the fill, I'll grab the color picker. I'll pick this color here and I'll reduce the saturation, increase the brightness, and maybe even change the hue a little bit. Okay. Now we want to clip the rim light inside of the rectangle. First, I'll rename it to rim light. And now I'm going to move the rectangle above it. And I'll change the blend mode of the rectangle from source over to destination atop. Now, this is not the result that we want. And this is because we're doing this inside of a group instead of a layer. So let's go ahead and rasterize this. And there we have it. I'm going to adjust this bottom part of the rim light ever so slightly before continuing. Okay. Now on the rim light, I'm going to right click, go down to Actions, Raster Effect, and I'll add a blur. Let's expand it here so we can see the blur. You can control the blur radius to make it either more or less blurry. So we have our rim light already. As such, I might modify the shape a bit more to the same down here, and I'll increase the blur. Okay, that works for now. I'll lock the rim light so it can't be selected. And we now have our overall bubble. Now let's add the text to it. But before I do so, I'll click on the bubble comp and I'll press Ctrl G. So I create a new group with it. And I'll rename this to Bubble 3 because we're already on Bubble 2. Inside of Bubble 3, I'll double click on it. So I'll double click on Bubble 3 to go inside of the group. And now I'll grab the text tool and left click and I'll write hello exclamation point. Maybe not all caps. Hello exclamation point. I'll switch the font to Poppins and I'll go for black or maybe extra bold, and I'll change the size to 80. Place it around the center. I'll change the color to near black, as such, and we're almost there. I'm not fully convinced with the rim light just yet, so in here, grab unlock, grab this, grab the rim light, and I think I'm going to move these closer to the edges, just like this. The rim light feels a bit, well, not rim enough, so I'll just move these closer. Lock the rim light again. Let's say a bit better. Okay. Hi, Future Jonathan here, and I just noticed that I forgot to mention how to add the drop shadow. So let's go ahead and switch this to 100. So for the drop shadow, because we have a layer, which is the bubble comp, so this includes the rim light and all, we can simply expand it, right click on it, go down to Action, Raster, and add Shadow. And now inside of the raster effects, we can now control the values of our shadow, like this. All right, that's it. Back to the video. So now let's animate the text. So for the text, I'll grab the text over here. I'm going to expand it. And at the bottom, we have text effects. Right click on it and add effect. Expand this and expand the text effect. To see the influence of the text effect, we have to grab the point tool, and this is it right there, this little curve. I'll zoom out a bit. Now, inside of the text effect, you have quite a few controls, but we're only really going to focus on a few things. Now, it's important to note that you can target letters, words, or lines. You can control the influence and much more. So I'll start by left-clicking, holding, and dragging these two last dots. I'll press G and X, and I'll pull them all the way to the right. Okay? And I'll grab the first dot here, press G and X, and I'll pull it out a little bit so that we have a nice smooth curve. Now, inside of the text effect, you have diminish. Diminish is where you find the different points. So point 1 is this first point over here. Point 2 is this second point. Point 3, you guessed it, is this one here. And then point 4 at the bottom here. They also have X and Y values. And these are what we're going to animate, the X values. But we only need to animate point 1 and point 2. Okay, so now let's start creating our text animation. I'll go inside of the transform of the text effect, and I'm going to increase the rotation. I see I'm not getting live updates at the moment. Not sure why this is happening. So I'm going to rotate the text far down, and I'll use the translation over here to lower it a little bit on the y-axis. I don't want it to go outside of the text bubble because then I'll have to clip it inside of it for when the animation happens, and I don't want to do all of that. And finally, I'll drop the opacity all the way down to 0. Right? I'll collapse the transform, I'll collapse the text effect altogether. Now, if I grab these two dots, press GX, and I move it forward, wherever it's all the way at the top is where the influence is 100%, and wherever it's all the way at the bottom is where the influence is at 0. And you can actually move these dots up and down. All right, so for now, I'll push this all the way to the side, and I'll right click on text effect and add another effect. Now, inside of this text effect, I'm going to go to the transform, and I'm going to rotate in the opposite direction. But first, let me go ahead and grab these two last dots, press GX, and pull them all the way out, just like this. I'll also pull the first one out a bit so we get a smooth curve. All right. The reason for the second text effect is if you look at the original here that I made, let me go ahead and turn on the text again, the text here. When the text shows up, it doesn't just rotate and stop, but it rotates beyond the point and then snaps. So there's a bit of recoil. So this is what we're generating with this secondary text effect. So instead of doing this manually, we just make a second text effect and we push the rotation even further. So now, when you combine these two together, this first one has to stop before the second one. Okay, so now we're left with the text coming up and then it recoils back, and then it goes back to normal. Usually I get live preview when moving these things around, but for some reason right now it's not giving me the live preview. Alright, all that's left to do now is to animate the text effects. So let's choose our starting point. So I'll start around frame 24, I guess. So I'll expand the text effect. I'll go inside of diminish, and I'll animate or add a keyframe to the X value of 0.1, and I'll do the same for 0.2. We don't really need any keyframes on the Y value, so there's no need to add additional unnecessary keyframes. So I'll do the same for the secondary text effect. So I'll go in here, I'll look for diminish, the 0.1, I'll add a keyframe on X, 0.2, add a keyframe on X. And now the keyframes will be automatically added when we move these 4 points. So I'll move forward, let's say 1 second. So that should be around 48 frames, I think, since we were on 24. I'll grab all 4 of them, press G, X, and go all the way out. And now if we play back, we get our animation. Let me expand this so we can actually see the keyframes. And now the second animation, or the driving animation, is a little rotation and scale on the bubble itself. So for this, I'm going to pick this point here, let's see, right here for now. And I'm going to add a keyframe to the bubble 3 transform, so the bubble itself, the group. I'll add a keyframe to rotation, then I'll add a keyframe to scale. I'll go back roughly 1 second. So let me see, here we were on 28. So frame 4, let's say, for now. And I'll grab the selection tool. And before I animate, I'm going to move the pivot point, this little plus button here. You can also use the alignment tool, switch it to pivot, and you can align it, for example, at this corner down here. And now I'll press R for rotate, I'll rotate it down, and then I'll press S for scale, and I'll scale it down significantly. So now we have this little animation. So you can use the automatic interpolation to add some ease in and ease out, but for this one, I'll do it manually. So I'll switch to the graph editor. Let me scale this up a bit. I'll grab the X and Y for the scale because you have to animate both of these. Otherwise, it's going to stretch. And then I'll switch it to smooth nodes. I'll left click, hold, drag, and press X to lock it on the X axis. I'll do the same thing now for the Y. Left click, hold, drag. I'll make sure they end just around the same point. I'll do the same thing for the top. Left click, hold, drag, and press X to lock it on the X axis. Repeat. Left click, hold, drag, press X. And now we have a bit of easing in the scale. I'll do the same thing for the rotation. Let's click on bubble again. Left click, hold, drag. I'll make these smooth. And for these, I'll exaggerate a bit. So I'll left click, hold, press X to drag. And left click, hold, press X to lock on the X axis as such. I'll go back to the keyframes. On frame 0, I'll press I to add the endpoint. And then I'll add the out point around here. Press Shift and Spacebar to play back. And okay, so for this, I think I'm going to, let's collapse this, grab the animation, and I'll drag it in a bit to see if I make it a tad faster. All right, I could play with the curves a bit more, but I think you get the point. And then finally, you'll see that I'm using the visibility range. This is simply by right-clicking on the bubble group, and you go down to visibility range. Now, if you move the visibility range itself, it's going to move the keyframes with it. So instead, just click on the edges and you can drag the range of visibility. So understand that this is only visible as long as the range is included. So if I move the playhead outside of it, it disappears. So I use this to make the bubbles only appear where I wanted them to appear. So this one, for example, when it's tiny, it won't show until it gets to that point. So let's zoom in here so you can see it. Invisible, visible. visible, visible. And that's it. Remember to save your progress as you go. I have a Ko-fi link down in the description for those of you who'd like to support the channel. You can click on this playlist here to learn more about Kdenlive and even Friction. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.